I have never been good at making coffee. So over the last few years, I've been looking for a better coffee maker and a better way of making coffee just to kind of up my game a little bit. So I think I've finally found the perfect way for me to not only have a really good cup of coffee, but to be able to consistently make a good cup of coffee every time I want a cup. Now, I want to say straight away here that I did buy a couple of things to help level up my coffee making because I have no skills, so I need all the help I can get. I also do want to say that this is not a sponsored video in any way. I don't have links for any of these products, but they're all pretty easy to find. If you don't find them in your local area, you can certainly find them on Google to find the best price for them. So this is an Aeropress, and this is the single best thing I've ever bought myself to up my coffee making skills. With this brewer, you really don't need to have any skills, and so it's kind of the perfect brewer for me. Now this comes as a little kit. They give you a little coffee scoop, a stir stick, as well as some paper filters to get you started. And I think it's probably important just to go over how they tell you to use this Aeropress in the instructions, because I use it very differently. You're supposed to take a little paper filter, drop it in the filter holder here, and then undo the plunger out of the Aeropress assembly here, and then put the filter and filter holder in place. You stick this on your mug that you're going to brew into. You put your coffee grounds inside here. You then fill this chamber up full of hot water, boiling water, and then you have to quickly take the plunger assembly, push it in here, and this is the way the directions tell you to use this brew device. The problem here is, as soon as you start to fill up the chamber full of boiling water, or at least hot water, it will start to drip out the bottom. So it'll start dripping through your coffee grounds and out into your mug at the bottom here. So you have to quickly get the plunger in place, and this is a little rubber stopper plunger that fits very tightly into the inside of the brew chamber. And once you do that, you can then pull up a little bit on the plunger, and that creates a little bit of a vacuum that will stop the water and the coffee from going through and into your cup at the bottom. So what I don't like about this method is that this is full of hot water. Now this is a plastic device, so it doesn't get too hot. It's not like it's gonna burn you, it doesn't feel like, but it's very uncomfortable to hold on to, especially because it's up on top of your cup. If you're using a different cup, say like this little insulated pint glass that I have, because this is taller and has a narrower base on it, tends to be a little bit more shaky, and so it's kind of difficult to get this plunger in, especially holding on to this full of hot liquid. So I don't use this method. Let me boil up some water, and I'll set up the Aeropress and we'll make a cup of coffee together. Now, while I wait for my water to come to a boil, I am going to grind up some coffee here, and I do use a hand grinder. This is obviously not necessary, but it's just something that I like to do. So the water is just about up to the boil, so I'm going to take the Aeropress and get it set up. I'm just going to pull the plunger assembly, and I'm just going to pull it down to about the number 4 here that's marked on the outside of the brew chamber. That's going to allow us room for both our coffee grounds that I just ground up and our water. And now that our water is up to a boil, I'm going to pour it into the Aeropress, but I'm also going to utilize the other item that I bought that really helps me make a really good cup of coffee, and that is a brew scale. Now in this instance here, I'm just going to use this as a timer, and yes, you could just use your phone as a timer, or just a clock on the wall. And once I have a little bit of water into the Aeropress here, I just want to stir this up. And this is kind of important because depending on the type of coffee that you're using, you can get some coffee that doesn't get completely submerged in the water. So in this step, we're really just trying to get all that coffee broken up and get a nice slurry of coffee and water together. So once you do that, you can then fill up the brew chamber here all the way to the top pretty much. And one little trick that I do is I've got to get the top to this on, and so I just add a couple drops of water into the top and just wet that filter. That'll kind of stick it to the filter so that once I turn this upside down it won't fall out. And then we can put the top on. That's just an easy on and quarter twist, and we're going to let this sit for about 4.5 minutes. And that's kind of a key time there to go by. Whenever you're brewing coffee, you really shouldn't exceed 4.5 minutes. Once you go past 4.5 minutes, coffee starts to get a little bit bitter. You get a little more bitter flavor out of it. Now, if you like bitter flavor, you can definitely go past the 4.5 minutes. But I tend to like my coffee to be a little bit smoother. And I will just point out that I did use a chopstick as my stir stick because I think it's just the best stir. The stir that comes with the Aeropress in the kit, I just threw that out. I also threw out the coffee scoop that comes in the kit because since I am grinding my coffee and it falls into this little cup here in the bottom of my grinder, I find that I don't need any type of device to get the coffee into the Aeropress. Okay, so we've hit 4.5 minutes. We're actually a little over 4.5 minutes. That's okay. This is kind of just something we should just loosely follow when we're using an Aeropress. If you go a little bit over 4.5, I find it doesn't make a huge difference, at least not with Aeropress coffee. It does with other types of brewing coffee, so that's just something to keep in mind. I'm going to turn off my timer here, set that aside, and I'm just going to press that hard down just to make it easier to clean the Aeropress. You really should clean them up immediately when you're finished brewing up a cup, but I keep some squares of paper towel. I just cut these up in little tiny squares and just give the top a quick wipe. A lot of times I will reuse these paper filters, so I'll just peel that off and I'll just set this aside to dry. This is an older one that I've used. They curl up a little bit and they get a little bit dirty, but the old coffee just flakes right off and it's ready to be used. I reuse these usually between 4 and 6 times before I actually throw them out. With cleaning up the Aeropress, it's pretty easy, especially if you give it that really hard press like I did, because you end up with this little hockey puck of coffee grounds. All you've got to do is just dump this into your trash can, which I will do right now. And then any remaining little bits of coffee, you can just simply wipe off with the paper towel. Now, if you've got plenty of running water, you can just take this and run it under the tap, and that'll clean it off as well. Now, I know you're going to say, this is not a lot of coffee. This is a half a mug of coffee. What are you doing there? Well, what I have done is I've made a concentrate, a coffee concentrate, and we're just going to top this up with a little bit of hot water from the kettle just to thin it out a little bit. And that is our finished cup of coffee. Now, if you want to make coffee for more than one person, or at least 2 cups of coffee at a time, this is really easy. You're just going to put 2 scoops of coffee in, or 2 portions of coffee into the Aeropress. You definitely want to stir it up, give it a really good stir, and then brew it just like normal. But when you go to press the Aeropress through, just press it into a different container. So I like to use this little milk steaming pitcher. So I'm going to press it into this, then fill this up full of hot water. Once you have that, you can divide it out into 2 mugs. That way you'll get a nice, good, consistent cup of coffee between the 2 mugs for both people. So my tips for making the best possible coffee at home is to not buy pre-ground coffee. I have a very fancy coffee grinder, and this is a very expensive coffee grinder. I don't need a grinder that is this nice, but it's just something that I've wanted for a long time, so I treated myself to. This is made by a company called Staresso. I do have a video on this. I've had it a couple of years, and it's just been a fantastic grinder. But like I said, there's lots of other grinders that are out there on the market that you can even buy at a local grocery store that will work perfectly well, especially in an Aeropress. So it could be a little too finely ground or not ground enough, and you're still going to get a really good cup of coffee out of an Aeropress. That's why I like it so much. Now, if you don't want to grind coffee before you make every cup of coffee, then at least utilize the coffee grinder at the store that you buy your coffee from, or even better, go to your local coffee roaster in your town and they will give you the correct grind. That would be a better way to go, but the best way to go is grind your coffee right before you brew it. You'll be amazed at the difference in flavor. You really will be amazed. Now, my second tip for better coffee brewing, no matter what you are using to brew your coffee, is to use a brew scale and timer like this one that I used. Now, this is made by a company called Weightman, and the quality of it has been kind of so-so. The lid has broke, and the plastic material that it's made out of is decent quality, but fairly difficult to clean, so it always looks a little bit dirty. It is a nice scale for me though, because it's small. It fits in my small space here. How I use the scale here is I used it just as a brew timer. That's something that I like to have, especially in the morning. When I get up in the morning, I try not to look at my phone. It's been my goal to not look at my phone until at least 9 or 10 a.m. So that way I'm up and moving around a little bit before I look at all the mess that my phone brings me. On a day-to-day basis, and just like I did here today, I'm not weighing out those coffee beans. I know that when I open up my coffee grinder here and dump the beans in, I know what it looks like, sort of, as long as I've weighed them once before. I kind of aim for about 15 to 18 grams of ground coffee per 10 ounces of water, because my mug here is a little bit small. So if I make a 10-ounce bit of coffee to fit my mug, that leaves me a little bit of space for half and half. And so that's kind of where I'm basing my figure on, that 15 to 18 grams. And every coffee is going to be a little bit different. So just depending on the size of the beans and also the roast level of the beans, it's going to make a difference of how they weigh versus their volume. So that's a nice thing to have, a scale, just so that you can just make sure that you've got the correct amount of coffee for the water that you're using, and that just makes sure that you're making coffee consistently every time you go to brew a cup. And my last piece of advice for making really good coffee is probably the best piece of advice, which is to start out with really good coffee. I encourage you to stop buying coffee always at the grocery store. I mean, you can get good coffee at the grocery store, but you should try to just once in a while get out to your local coffee roaster. Someone that you can talk to, tell them what you like. If it's a coffee roaster that sells a wide variety of coffees, they're going to ask you a bunch of questions to kind of narrow down the correct coffee to sell you so that you will be happy with it, because obviously they want you coming back again and again. Just Google a coffee roaster in your area and I'm sure you're going to find somebody not too far away. Now, if you can't, certainly just look at your grocery store, look at what they have on offer. Definitely take advantage of bulk coffee, because you can buy just a little tiny bit out of the bulk bin. They sell that by the pound. So yes, you can buy a full pound, but you can also buy a tablespoon if that's all you want, just to try it, just to make sure it's a coffee that you're going to like and that you want to buy again. Because specialty coffee is very expensive, and usually really good coffee is very expensive. So treat yourself once in a while to some really good stuff, and that's how you'll have the best tasting coffee, in my opinion. So hopefully this has been a little bit helpful, and I don't really mean to push an Aeropress, but I switched to an Aeropress a couple of years ago because I just found it to be the best and easiest way for me to get a good consistent cup of coffee. I'm not trying to sell an Aeropress. I think pour overs are really good too. I have actually 4 different ways of making coffee, 4 different coffee makers in my van. 2 are pour over methods. I have another one that's a little different way of making coffee that I don't use very often. The one that I always grab First is the Aeropress, and then on special occasions I'll pull out my pour-over brewer and make a cup of coffee with that. So I'm not trying to say you should go out and buy something. I think really just buying really good beans and treating them properly is the best way to get a cup of coffee. So hopefully this has been helpful, and thanks for watching. I really appreciate it.